Well, good morning. I'm Nikki Haverstock. I was the January author, and I'm here with the February author, Sara Rosett. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Good. This is for those who've been in the club for a while. This should feel like deja vu because last year we were the
Yes.
January and February authors, and we also did an interview. So it's a fun little, a little rehashing, and neither one of us remember what we talked about last year. So we might talk about the same thing. We'll see.
So we figured you guys probably don't remember either. So
Yeah, fair enough. So, Sara, why don't you give us your 30-second summary of you as an author?
okay. Well, I've always loved books and reading. Going to the library was like my favorite thing when I was a kid, and just reading as many books as possible. So I dreamed of being an author, and I dabbled in all kinds of different writing type things and jobs. And eventually, when my son was born, he's the youngest, I thought my life is just going to get busier. And if I'm ever going to write a book, I should just go ahead and start because I'm not going to have more time. I'm only going to have less time. So that was what I did. I wrote during nap time. And, it was just, I loved cozies and I decided to write a cozy. So I worked on that. It took years and years. And eventually I got a cozy published and that became the Ellie Avery series. And then I branched out from there and I've written a couple of contemporary cozy series, one set in like England, another more travel series. And then lately I've been writing historical mysteries, historical cozies, because I love the 1920s. And so I've just kind of, explored writing and learned about the business and become a self-published author over time, was traditional and now I'm indie. And yeah, that's me.
What do you love about cozy mysteries?
Uh, I love just the cozy feel you get. I love that you can go back and visit the same little village or town and you get to know the characters and you can see what's happening in their lives. And I love that even though something horrible happens, even though there's a murder, it's a puzzle and it's not, gory or gross. And it's like an intellectual puzzle to figure out. And at the end, everything is always justice is done and the equilibrium of the community is restored. Oh, that's our driveway dinger. But anyway, um, so yeah, I love that everything is okay in the end. And even though it's about a murder, when you get to the end of a cozy, everything is okay. And it's like in this world right now where everything is just like so crazy and stressful, I enjoy escaping into cozies because I know that's a world where I will be safe and, enjoy my time there.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite? I'm not going to say favorite because it's too much pressure, but standout cozies that you've enjoyed, either when you started,
Okay.
now, anytime in between.
Okay. So when I first started reading cozies, I think my very first one I read was by Leslie Meyer. And she has this
Hmm.
long series, Cabot Cove, I think is what her town is called in Maine. And I mean, that's a great series and lots of fun to read. I read a lot of Carolyn Hart back then,
Mm.
Diane Mott Davidson, all these authors that, um, they're just like my heroes. They were the ones that I aspired to be like. Um, I also read a lot of Elizabeth Peters. She's not really
Hmm.
cozy. She's more a little kind of romantic suspense kind of thrown in there with mystery. Um, Lately, I've been reading a lot of historical cozies because I just love historical stuff. I love mysteries that were written in the 1920s and 30s, the golden age. And then I'm enjoying books by modern authors that are written during that time. I love Reese Bowen. Um, Ashley Weaver has a great series. She actually has two series now. She's got a new one about a safecracker in London in World War II, female safecracker in London too. So that's fascinating. Um, yeah, I just enjoy like the I like the cozies and then I like the historicals. I like the contemporary and the historical. So my reading kind of crosses over.
Yeah, I remember I got really into like I want to say educational, but like themed cozies. Like
Hmm.
I want to learn everything about wine and coffee,
Yes.
and that was a really big thing in the early 2000s. It's like everything had a theme, and they would
Yes.
include like patterns and recipes. And I remember
Yes.
I was like, "That's what I want. I want to say that I'm learning stuff while there's murder." And So I really enjoy
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. I think that's cool because you get a little look at a lifestyle or a hobby or something like a work atmosphere that you don't know about, kind of, you can kind of learn while you're being entertained.
Yeah, yeah, and it gave it's like the same way I like slow burn romances in a lot of my cozies because it gives you sort of like a we're gonna keep coming back to this and we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
we can enjoy the murder of the week so to speak and then we have this nice little journey that we take together with the author.
Yes.
So you have gone from traditional publishing where you started
Mm-hmm.
to self-publishing. What was your traditional publishing experience like?
It was very good. I mean, I know a lot of people have, horror stories, but I had the same editor the whole time. And, they were very easy to work with. I would turn in my synopsis and send it off. And most of the time it was like, sounds great, write the book, and so there wasn't a lot of like, you know, horror stories like you hear. But so yeah, I wrote 10 cozies in the Ellie Avery series. And I wrote about, she was a mom, she was a military spouse. And that kind of came out of my background in my life because back when I was trying to get published, like you're saying, um, like the cozy market, then you had to have a hook, something interesting that your character did. And I was like, I have nothing interesting at all in my life. I'm a mom. I know how to cook and bake, but there are already books like that. And then one day I realized, oh, I'm a military spouse and people don't know about that
Yeah.
lifestyle. And so that's what I did. I wrote about a military spouse who was a mom and a professional organizer. And that series, I loved writing it. I took a lot of stuff from my life, things that we had experienced, and put it into the books, especially things that were incredibly frustrating. I was like, I'll get out my frustrations in this book. I'll work this out here. This person will die. This horrible thing will happen. And then, we can make it all okay in the book. And so, yeah, I did that for 10 years. And then I did that 10 books in that series. And I heard about indie publishing and I heard about authors who were making really good money and enjoying and writing kind of whatever they wanted. And that was the thing with traditional publishing is the pay was not great, to be
Mhm.
perfectly honest. That was like the downside. Your books were in bookstores, but only for the release month, usually,
Mhm.
and then they take them back. And so I was like, no, let me explore that and see what that is. And so I had no content that I owned. So I ended up writing a whole new series and releasing that independently. And I loved it. I really loved having the control over the covers and the content. With traditional publishing, you kind of start going down one path and they like you to stay on that path because you're developing a readership. And it's all the things that indie authors are learning. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, if I write in 6 different genres, it's really hard to develop a following. So they're like, let's stay in this path. And so if you want to write something different, like I pitched an idea for a historical novel, I don't know, maybe a couple of years in, and they were like, no, let's just keep you doing cozies. And I was like, okay. They were not interested. But as an indie author, I could, do whatever I wanted. And I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed being able to make the books, the length I wanted and have the cover I wanted and stuff like that. So, and it's a much closer relationship with my readers because I can release the books on my schedule. And so, like, if I can release quicker, then I can. It's not like, oh, well, we don't have a slot for that until 2025. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. No, is speaking of branching out, is there something maybe in the distant future that you're considering that is not currently in your wheelhouse?
I feel like the historicals are so rich. Like, there's so much going on that I can do so many different things in the historicals. Like, I can explore different countries, different cultures, and things like that. So I'm kind of drawn to that. I think my characters may travel soon. So
Ooh.
I'm excited.
So maybe more historicals is where and different places is
Yes.
where you'll get your scratch that itch.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I love reading and watching historical cozies, but it's like when you go to think about how you'd write one, it's like, oh boy, you better really love history, or
Yeah.
or throw a bunch of witches and make it paranormal, which is kind of what I do. It's like I don't want to deal with reality, so I'm going to throw witches or spaceships in there.
Yeah. See, I can't do that. I have to have, like, when I'm writing something, I have to have like this little grain of truth in it. So,
Okay.
like with the historicals, there is a lot of research, but I really enjoy it. And And to me, when I do the research, I always find more things to write about. Like I'll be like,
Mhm.
oh, I need to find out about this building or this type of food or something. And or like how photography was in the 1920s, who took the photographs and what did they, and then I'm going off on this rabbit hole and it ends up that I have a character who's a photographer, or I've got an idea for book 5 can be about this person. So it kind of feeds, like I research and it helps me with the book I'm working on. And then sparks these all these other ideas. I'm like, oh, okay, I need that later.
Yeah. So is that where you primarily get a lot of your ideas? Is just through this research, which you love?
Yeah, it is now. When I was doing the contemporary cozies, I would watch the news and just all I was always kind of filing things mentally away that could be like clues or red herrings. And now when I read like just different things, travel logs, memoirs, especially, I find things and I'm like, oh, this would be a great red herring because things that don't matter now
Mhm.
could be something that somebody would be embarrassed about in the 1920s, even like, you know, things that we would not think would be that embarrassing, but things that people would not want other people to know, perhaps like they were divorced and they don't
Right.
want anybody to know that, or things, just things that, we don't think would be important now. But then like reading these memoirs and things gives me a different perspective and helps me come up with clues and ideas. So yeah, that's where I get a lot of my stuff is just in reading like old newspaper archives and old magazines. That a lot of it's been digitized, and you can just spend all day doing that.
That is considered Edwardian. Is that the 1920s? This is where I
Well,
show my
Edwardian
limitations.
Edwardian is more early 1900 to like beginning of World War One. So then,
Okay.
like after World War One ended in like 1919 to 1930,
Okay.
that's kind of my sweet spot right now.
Okay. And that is not, does that have a fancy name in England?
No, it's basically it's called the interwar years, but I
Oh.
don't hear that used very much. So
Mm-mm.
I don't use it. Golden age of mystery fiction, jazz age, kind of those are all kind of. It doesn't have a specific. I wish it did. It would make it so much easier to
They,
market it.
do they use the term roaring 20s
Yeah,
in? Okay.
yeah.
I mentioned that because I saw on Audible, I listened to a Stephen Fry miniseries, I guess might be the
Hmm.
term about Victorian England and Edwardian England. And it
Uh-huh.
was very interesting. They focused on sort of things that you wouldn't, uh, like women in police work, which was thought of as
Oh
not
yeah.
existing, but they would talk about it. So, what are some sort of similar stuff in your roaring 20s, interwar years that you think people would be surprised to know if they don't study history?
Well, I think that with World War One, women took up a lot of roles because the men went to fight, and women took up a lot of roles, things that they hadn't done before. And when the men came back, women were expected to return home, and a lot of women didn't want to. And I don't know, I just found out some interesting things about roles of women, um, how everything was changing, and it was reflected like in their haircuts, because they all got the bob. That was like
Mhm.
the new thing. They cut off their hair. Um, Skirts got shorter. There was all kinds of um, new makeup. And this was something that I'd learned, and it's in one of my books, that it's the makeup, back then they didn't have uh, standards like testing standards and government standards, or if they did, they were obviously not well enforced because there were things in these makeup products that were horrible. There was one product that was about radium
Mm,
that is so good for you.
yeah.
And because that was like the new thing. And so there were products that actually had radium in them. And some of the makeup that for the skin was uh, had just horrible things in it that were actually poisonous. And like for asthma, they
Mm.
had cigarettes that contained things that could actually make you more sick. So people would smoke a cigarette because they had asthma, thinking it would help them. And so just all these things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so bizarre, but at the time, that's what they thought would help. And, so I found out some interesting things like that. Interesting things about, I read a book about this woman was talking about early flight. that, back, the airplane was used in World War One, and it was like kind of coming into importance, but it wasn't like today where, like you can book a flight. It was like a special thing. It's very expensive, and only certain elite wealthy people could do it. But they talked about how many plane crashes there were because people would learn to fly and go fly. And sometimes there would be plane crashes, and a lot of times it would be wealthy people. So there was one that they don't know what happened to the people. They don't know why it went down, but so there's all these questions about these different crashes. And I was like, that could be a book. But there
Yeah.
was one where there was a crash, and the women had so much jewelry that it was scattered all over this field because they were, this wealthy class. And I was like, just things that, like, it's just a totally different way of life. We would not imagine, like, if we're going to go fly, we're not taking like all our jewelry with us, So
Right.
it was just a different way to live. And different, because I'm writing more about the aristocracy and kind of the upper class, although Olive is not she is of that society, that part of society, but her family doesn't have money. So it's
Okay.
it's interesting. How does she navigate being in this world, but like she can't really afford to live in the world, and what does she do?
Wow. So tell us
Yeah.
about you're referring to the series that people got the first book of, or was it
Yes,
the
yeah,
first?
Murder
Was it the first
Actually
book?
Manor.
Tell us about a little bit about the series in general. Without spoilers, of course. What can they
Okay.
expect if they continue through the series?
Okay. Well, Olive learns in the first series that she's pretty good at this detecting thing. Like, she's kind of throughout the series, she's learning to become a detective. And the way it's set up is the high society, then they really didn't want their dirty laundry aired in public, so they were like, not, they'd be more likely to go to somebody like Olive and say, hey, can you help us with this little
Right.
problem we have, rather than going to the police, because they wanted to keep everything quiet. And so as the series progresses, she becomes more of a detective. In the early beginning books, people are like, her family is like, hey, can you help us with this? And she's like, yes, I will check into this person and see if he's really who he says he is. And then as the series goes on, friends start recommending her to other people, saying, hey, you might want to go ask Olive because she helped us here. And then as we get further down the line, eventually she will be having people come to her who are not clients, they don't know anyone. They're just like, hey, I need help. And so she'll have just strangers coming to her. So she's growing as a detective, and she has a love interest, and things are inching along there because it's the 1920s. So, going kind of slow. But so she has Jasper, who is in every book, and he is so much fun to write. He's always got some fun quip or some droll comment, that kind of keeps everything from being too serious. And he's kind of her rock. She's pretty energetic and fun, and he's kind of the one that will bring her down and keep her grounded.
Is it safe to say that if people are a fan of Miss Fisher or Frankie Drake, this is probably a
Mm-hmm.
good series
Oh
for
yeah,
them?
yeah, very similar to that, in that tone. And we've got all the dresses and the big beautiful country homes, all that kind of stuff, all the fun things of the 20s. Yeah.
So then what are some of your other series that you have going on?
So I have the Ellie series that I talked about, that first one, long
Mhm.
time ago that I started. Then I have the Murder on Location series, which is, I put together two of my favorite things, Jane Austen, and I was really interested in location scouting. I watched a video, or I can't remember if it was a documentary, or maybe I read an article and then searched out everything about it. But there was this person who was a location scout for a TV show. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. What if there was a Jane Austen location scout, like for this Jane Austen film? And this woman had to go to England and find these locations. And so that whole series is about an American who is in England researching locations to shoot Jane Austen uh, adaptations. So that's the Murder on Location series. And then I have a series about travel, a mystery travel series called On the Run. And that one is more romantic suspense. It's kind of a throwback to classic romantic suspense, Mary Stewart, Elizabeth Peters type stories where a person goes to a wonderful, beautiful location and gets mixed up in this international conspiracy kind of thing. And she has to sort out what's going on. And of course, falls in love while she's there. So that's that one.
Sounds like you have a
So
lot of,
that's enough to keep me busy.
it sounds like you have a lot of moving around in all your series. If they don't start off travel, they end up moving around a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. Well, like the Murder on Location, I did not feel comfortable writing a character who is British because I was like, I've never lived in an English village. How can I write this? So I was like, okay, so my main character will be American and she'll come there and experience village life from the outside, which would be, I can do that. And then the historical series, I feel like it's so long ago that I can read enough and research enough that I can write that character. But yeah, I feel funny writing a character that I haven't, an experience I haven't lived. So I try and kind of tweak it so that it's more closer to me.
Yeah, I think all of my series are sort of fish out of water sort of series.
Mm-hmm.
And for the same reason, like I have no idea what it would be like to grow up a witch, but I kind of have an idea of what it would feel like if somebody said in your 20s you're a witch, you know? So even my
Yeah.
paranormals do that. So I think
Yeah.
there's what are some other similar themes that if people like one series, they might like the rest because they all share what?
Yeah. I didn't realize this until later, but a lot of my series have like an entrepreneurial thread. Like
Mhm.
Olive is like she's a modern girl and she's learning to earn her crust, as they would say in the 1920s. And so she's like on this journey of learning to be independent. And um, I've used that before, like in the Zoe series, the On the Run series. Zoe starts out doing all these kind of random odd jobs because she's freelance and she doesn't want to be tied down. But then as the series goes on, she finds out that she really loves this researching art theft. And so she gets involved in that. And so, you know, as the series goes on, she becomes kind of an art theft expert. And so then, you know, she can be involved in all these cases in these museums and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of one thing that I use a lot. Travel is big, location is big. Uh, yeah, English country homes. I'm always up for a book set in an English country home
And you love
as
putting
often as I
research
can.
in.
Yeah.
What okay, I'm gonna put you on the spot with some kind of difficult questions. So
Oh
prepare
no.
yourself.
Okay.
And it's
I'm
okay
nervous.
if you need it. Well, I was gonna say, what is something that you think that you do well as an author?
Okay, so I think I try and get the little details right that make the place and the time feel accurate. And I feel like I do that by kind of immersing myself in either the place or the time. And so like language, I love incorporating language from the 1920s in the books and like the books that the travel books and the books in England. I love including little details that are specific to, you know, the location. Like you would only find, you know, this type of street scene in this town, you know. I love doing that. So I think I'm good at that. Um, I love invoking a sense of place, I think is a thing too. I think that's part of that. I love readers feeling like emailing me and saying, oh, I felt like I was there. And I do have some readers who have emailed and said, oh, I grew up in England and then moved to Canada or the US as a child. But this brings back memories of when I was in England. I was like, oh, my day is made.
So that's a really big compliment to you, is if people like that's something you do well and you're really proud of.
Yeah. Yeah. I do enjoy that part a lot. Yeah.
Okay. And are you ready for another difficult question?
Sure.
Can you think of a question that people never ask you in author interviews that you kind of wish they would?
Mm. No.
I told you it was a hard question.
That's the hardest one.
Um, okay, well then I'll have to think of another question. Which is what How would you describe the tone of your books? Because we know that even like saying 1920s England, we have
Hmm.
everything from like, I gave the
Hmm.
example of the super sexy Miss Fisher, which my husband
Hmm.
used to always call the sexy detective because
Yeah, she's very sexy.
very sexy. And then you could have the Agatha Christie books that were
Hmm.
very um, always had a little more of an edge to them than you would expect. I always felt
Hmm.
they were always a little.
Yes.
I would always leave with some detail where I'd be like, "That was actually really ghastly. Like that was actually
Yes.
really scary."
Yeah, very,
Um,
some of them are very dark sometimes too. Yeah, the
yeah,
outcome.
and then and so on forth. So, what? How would you describe your tone?
My tone is very lighthearted. So even though there's all these things going on and there's an investigation that's into something very serious, the tone overall is lighthearted. And I hope that I try and incorporate humor, and I hope that comes across, but because humor is tricky for some people, don't see the same things funny that you do. But so there's always a lighter tone, there's always humor, and there's always a puzzle. I like a good mystery. I like it to be twisty, and I hope that I surprise you with either some of the red herrings or, the outcome of who the culprit is. So those are like the things that I want my books to have, that hopefully you'll get a good mystery, you'll get a fun kind of lighthearted tone, and the historicals, hopefully there's something interesting in there that you'll learn about the 1920s, something that, maybe you didn't know before. And yeah, so that's about it.
Great. Why don't you just tell people where they can find you? All the places they can learn more about you.
Okay, so the best place to go is sararosett.com. It's just SARAROSETT. And all my books are there. My books are on all the retailers, so you can find it and hopefully dive in and find whatever little niche of cozy or historical mystery you enjoy.
And they should be on the newsletter because
Yes,
that's when they signed up. But if they come over late, they can find your newsletter at your
yes.
and uh, Facebook as well.
I'm not on Facebook that much. I'm
Okay.
more on Instagram, and I also have a podcast, Mystery Books podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, so if it likes podcast, and that's all I do is I just talk about the books I've been reading and talk about themes and tropes that I enjoyed with no spoilers. So you can listen to the episode and see if the book is for you, and then read the book without any spoilers. So
And if anyone watching happens to be a writer, you also have a podcast for writers.
that's true. I do. I podcast with Jamie Albright. She's a romance author. And we do Wish I'd Known Then for writers. And that we just interview other writers about, what they wish they knew when they started, lessons they've learned, mistakes and successes that they've had. And we just have a great time talking about writing on that podcast. We love doing it. So
Yeah.
that one's actually every week. The Mystery Books podcast is seasonal, so it comes out in chunks.
Great. It's an excellent podcast. I can share that. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
well, thanks so much for talking with me, Sarah, and thank you everyone who watched.
Yeah. Thanks for interviewing me. And thanks for your great questions. They weren't too hard.
Okay, good. Okay. Bye everyone.
Bye.